Today, we are revisiting a topic that has a lot of interest: retirement. But we are not just talking about how to prepare for retirement financially. We will be shedding light on an often overlooked aspect of retirement planning: how to thrive in retirement emotionally, socially, and with a renewed sense of purpose. This understanding will not only enrich your knowledge, but also prepare you for a more fulfilling retirement journey. I'm joined by an extraordinary guest and someone very near and dear to me, Elizabeth Zelenka Parsons. Elizabeth is the founder at Elizabeth Parsons Law Firm, where she serves as outside general counsel to her clients as they navigate day-to-day legal and commercial issues. Elizabeth has an esteemed background, earning her Juris Doctor magna cum laude from the Georgetown University Law Center and her Bachelor of Arts summa cum laude in Economics and Political Science from James Madison University. She's also the brilliant author of Encore, a high achiever's guide to thriving in retirement, which is a must read that completely will transform your life after work. I'm excited to introduce her and deeply inspired by her work. She is a trailblazer, I believe, in changing how we look at, discuss, and plan for retirement. And as if all of that isn't enough, she's also one of my oldest and dearest friends. Fun fact: Elizabeth and I were roommates for nearly 3 years in and after college, and we're also sorority sisters. So I've always admired her incredible intelligence, her deeply introspective approach to life's challenges, and her generosity. So I really appreciate you being here today. I feel so lucky to share this conversation with someone who's been such an inspiration for me throughout different phases of my life. So welcome to the show, and I can't wait to dive in.
Oh, thank you, Traci. That's such a warm and wonderful introduction. And I share in a mutual way the admiration. So I really appreciate the time with you and, the opportunity to talk about all these interesting things. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I am really looking forward to the conversation because I really want to introduce the way in which you talk about retirement is unique, and it's also um, a really important thing that we to prepare for retirement in a different way in which we think about it. And I think it's relevant regardless of what career you're coming from or what kind of a transition you're going through. So your approach is not just insightful, but it's really life changing for someone who might be on the precipice of taking this leap into retirement. So, as I said to you before, I had read about a third of your book, and I'm really grateful to have gotten to read any of it, and I cannot wait to finish it. But I was really blown away by how deeply your insights really resonated. As we look at diving into this topic, I'm really looking forward to introducing all of the retirement preparation to everyone, regardless of their career, as I've mentioned. So let's start at the
Yeah.
beginning. Let's just start there. How did we get to a point where we have adopted this misguided illusion that retirement should be days filled with just leisure and fun activities and everything positive, when in fact most people approach this phase in their life with a lot of uncertainty?
Yeah, it's a great question. And funny enough, it was one that I decided to dig into because I had absolutely no real substantive understanding of all this mythology, right, that exists around the concept of retiring. And it was really poignant for me personally. And I'll share this quickly because I think it helps explain the way that I approached that question. I used the idea of front ending my retirement to explain a decision I made in my mid 30s to leave a very intense law firm career that I'd worked incredibly hard to get, because it was clashing with my responsibilities as a mom to two very small children. And I was unable at the time, the way many people do, I just couldn't make them all fit together in a way that I was proud of. So anyway, I made the tough decision to leave my career, and I really loved what I did professionally. But what I said to everybody who was looking at me quizzically and confused, like, what are you doing? I said, "Oh, don't worry. I'm just front ending my retirement. Yeah, I'm just going to borrow against my future a little bit." And I didn't mean financially. I meant I'm going I'm going to take this time for myself. I need time, not money right now. I need to raise my kids, and I'll figure
Yeah.
this whole thing out later, but I'll land on my feet. I'm going to move across the country to a less expensive city, and it's going to be great. And I had this concept of what retirement represented in my mind, which was, I'll be the master of my time and the way I deploy myself, and I'll just land on my feet. It'll be great, And for 3 months, it was really euphoric, and because it was a big adventure. And then all of a sudden, it occurred to me I'd lost my identity, I'd lost my life structure, I'd lost my community, I'd lost my purpose. And it's not that I didn't love being a mom, but that was a fraction, honestly, of who I was. And it left me stunned and confused and a little insecure, to be honest. And I felt it took a number of years to reorient myself and get my feet under me again. And part of me putting all of that together was investigating this concept of retirement, because it held a lot of mythology in my mind, and it seemed like this substantive idea that I was going to go and live, right? And so I dug into the history a little bit and realized, oh my gosh, retirement was born out of politics and marketing. I mean, this is not an answer to human
Right.
well-being at all. And without getting into too much of those details, you've got to chuckle when you realize that the Social Security Act of 35 set the benefits age at 65 in an
Yeah.
era where your average working male died at 58, right? So the whole idea was the government was going to sort of support us in our old age, but that
No.
wasn't really, yeah, right. That wasn't really that, substantive. And then, the post World War II boom had all this sort of had a very sort of well-to-do group of people who had money, and suddenly they could stop working sooner. And, the real estate industry seized on that and started marketing, Sun City and these ideas, the golden years. And it's all marketing, then, you realize the 401k came along, and there's a financial services industry that does certainly help us save our money and manage it. But it's also the messaging is always about how you're going to live a life of leisure. And the truth is, as well, I'm sure we'll talk about, you've got to have more going on than leisure. Leisure has meaning when it's in tension with meaningful effort and engagement, right? It all by itself, it becomes boring very quickly. So
Mhm.
long answer to your question, but I think it sets the table a little bit for why this is such a challenging inflection point for people when they've held a bit of a mythology in their mind about it.
Yeah. So, well, in some ways, what I do with coaching and advising people on
Yeah.
financial plans feeds into the this sort of oversight that we have all bought into. That it's all about preparing for your financial future.
Right.
I thought what made your approach the perfect blend with my approach really is that when I work with clients, I really spend an awful lot of time talking to them about their core values,
Mhm.
because I believe that when you truly identify those, and I'm not talking those surface level values, I'm talking about what is it that I deeply, authentically do with my time when nobody's watching, right?
Right.
Like, what is it that I really value in my time? And I find when people really tap into that is when I can see changes in spending and saving behavior.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, I think, ultimately, when we're discussing retirement savings, I always remind my clients that saving is actually just future spending. And I
Yeah.
thought actually you put it perfectly. I have a quote here from your book where you said, "Money sitting in a bank means very little, absent a practical application. It only acquires meaning when you liquidate it into a gift, an experience, or an opportunity to advance some aspect of your life that matters to you."
Mhm.
I thought that was awesome because there's another book that I think it's The Psychology of Money that talks about
Yes.
money being energy. It's
Yes.
really like it's not in and of itself, it means nothing. So
Right.
um I really love that. I really loved that quote, and it really resonated with me and how I look at things. So you explore the genuine struggle of losing identity and purpose. You just mentioned you having had that experience, and that's sort of what brought you to this moment. I love another thing that you wrote in Encore is that the retirement dream is tragically flawed if we reduce it to just the money that we have in the bank account, which sort of is this second side of what we were just talking about with money being energy, and it only matters when we translate it into something that's of value to us, whether
Right.
it's a thing or an experience.
Yeah.
So besides, I know you've talked about your story. You've worked with a lot of people. I mean, how did you realize that helping executives transition into retirement with purpose was a calling or something that would be really meaningful to other people?
Yeah, I think it was originally born out of, my struggle. And I always think that the things that we've lived and solved for ourselves equip us in a sort of special way to help other people, because we really do know the dark moments where you're lost and you don't really want to tell people that you're lost. You want to you want to act like everything's fine, but the truth is you're lost and you don't know where you're going. And then if you figure that out for yourself, suddenly you're the person who can be more sure-footed for somebody else. You can say, look, I've really walked through this change myself, and it's hard. I mean, many of the people we work with are incredibly successful. I mean, they're successful financially beyond anything they ever dreamed of. They're incredibly skilled human beings. They're very used to being masterful and sure-footed, and to feel this way is foreign and frightening and lonely. And that's what's interesting to me is almost everybody going through this keeps it a secret. It's a lonely experience because the world around you is wanting to pop the corks out of the champagne, and you're thinking, I don't know who am I? I mean, this does not feel exciting to me. So when I had recovered myself and done the work, over years, the thing that triggered me to imagine that it could help others was the collapse in 2008, because I was working in a consultation business, with big companies. And at that time, especially large law firms, there was going to be a massive contraction. I knew it. And I knew people were going to be, forced out of their positions and careers you're right, in their power years, really, in a lot of ways. And they had every expectation they were going to take that career to the finish line, and now they aren't. And there's no obvious place to go. The thing you've got to do is reinvent. And that's what I had to do for myself. And it caused me to sit down and really codify in a way all the work I'd done for myself and try to organize it into some sort of program where I thought, you know what, I bet I could accelerate the transition for people, so it's not so lonely and painful and long.
Yeah.
I think I've got some techniques that would help. So that's what really got me motivated to start working with folks. And so I piloted, the program in its early versions with people nearly for free who were going through these changes, and got enough data back that I realized this is helping. I mean, this stuff helps, and so that was the beginning of me creating this as a really significant professional endeavor. And it lives alongside to this day my work as a lawyer. I still do work as a lawyer in a very different market now. But I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of high achieving, executives, professionals, people who've sold businesses, but people on the verge of these big changes, to help them with, a really much more organized, intentional framework for figuring out how they navigate the change and what the pathways are ahead of them that feel, at least at the beginning, intentional enough that they're not wandering in the desert for too long before they start to feel like, hey, I think I've got this, this is fun.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to go back because you talk about, in general, most of the people you were working with are real high achievers. I mean, that's the name of the book, or the subtitle of the book. And, I mean, I really resonate with that because I always say that I don't know, there's like probably a word for it, but I love to check a box. Like I'm a to-do checker, like I wanted to check my to-do box off. And I really think that So you've touched on this idea, and it's something that you said in your book, the shift from human doing to human being. And I think it's interesting. Like, I mean, that it takes courage for these people to step back and even acknowledge that they're really scared of something that is impending. And how do you guide a client to remembering that little phrase? It's
Mhm.
not just about what you do; it's also about how you be.
Yeah, yeah, and who you are,
Yeah,
there's um, a really important foundation that we lay, when we work with people, and I'll just to set the table quickly so some of this makes sense. With our premier sort of program, we literally spend 2 entire days, two of us do, with one client, over 2 entire days. So we go very deep with people, and there are other modalities that we work in too. But just that was where our work started, and still to this day is a large piece of what we do. So in those kinds of experiences, we spend a full half a day working through this very important question of who are you. And you said it earlier, I think, very well, but the values piece is part of it. Who are you in a very authentic way? What is it that is going to endure about you after you set this career down? The career isn't who you are, it's what you've done. But we have these ways of categorizing ourselves in life because we want to belong. That's what humans, part of what motivates us. And so it's natural to feel like your profession or even the place you work is part of who you are. But the truth is there are many parts of you that are very, very enduring, and in some cases have had to be sidelined, right, in
stay
order to
silent.
show up as a professional person. And so we help people. We have a lot of very intriguing questions, and it's all a facilitation, but we mostly do this through storytelling, and we have people tell us lots of stories, but they're really interesting prompts they've never thought of before. And with smart people, you got to do that, right? You have to go in through the side door, or they'll just tell you what they think you want to hear. So
Right.
especially lawyers. But anyway, we got pretty good at this. But what happens is that people get back in touch with themselves in surprising ways, and we see it. It's often emotional that they're finding parts of themselves that have been really neglected or even just shunted away. And they get excited when they recover these parts of themselves and start to see they've got kind of an unlived life ahead of them. And it's not with regret. It's everybody's proud and happy of the chapter they've had. But what I remind them of is this is an incredible opportunity. You're standing at the beginning of something, not just the end of something. And I like to tell people this is almost like a graduation. Think of it more like that. It's no different, really, than when you finished
Mhm.
college or grad school or whatever, and you're standing on the beginning of this incredible set of opportunities. It's all new. There's a lot to learn, sure, but here's what you're here for: a ride on the river. Like I said in my last, my 11th chapter, that's what we're all here for. So you're equipped. You've probably got finally enough financial security to feel some freedom. You've got great relationships. You've got skills and know-how, you know, I mean, and you're going to get in touch with who you really are. And what can we make with this that's spectacular? Why wouldn't you go for spectacular? I mean, so
I
that's
know.
a little bit of how we do it.
It's interesting because there is so much energy around this idea of finding, like, doing, like, what is your life purpose? What is your why? What is your, there's
Mhm.
so much, that's, I mean, it feels like everything I read anymore
Yeah.
is about that. And yet s there's so much conversation around it, but it's not easy to do. So,
No.
I think it's interesting because you, mentioned the emotional component, and I know in the book you even get into some of the psychological
Mhm. Mhm.
components. And I wanna just one of I've shared this story before, but one of the turning points in my life, was realizing I needed to take control of my finances. So you
Mhm.
mentioned that we often, because of things that we go through, we end up sharing those lessons with other people to shortcut it for them. My aha moment, though, came in a very odd, you know, set of
Yeah.
circumstances, like many do. I mean, I was, as you know, I'm a mother through adoption. So
Yes.
my oldest daughter, when she came home, was in a bit of state of trauma because she came
Mhm.
home right before her second birthday. And she was really caught, and you talk about this in your book, that fight, flight, freeze response. She was
Yes.
in it was transitioning for her was really, really difficult. And I started to dive into brain science, really,
Mhm.
from, traumatic for kids that had had these traumatic early beginnings. And I discovered neuroplasticity, which I know is
Yes.
sort of uh, correlates to some of the stuff that you talk about in your book. And for the anyone who hasn't ever heard me talking about neuroplasticity, it's just the brain's ability to rewire itself. It is
Exactly.
such an amazing part of science. It was such a relief for me as a parent to know that I could
Mhm.
really interrupt this traumatic response mechanism that was going on in my daughter, and I got to watch it happening in real time. But one of the things that was happening while, like you, I was leaving a high paced, high energy job where I traveled a lot, and I just didn't think that I was available for my children enough. So I stepped away from a career,
Mhm.
but suddenly the financial piece started to play out, and just realizing how avoidant I had been pretty much my whole life of my finances. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, I had taken responsibility for it. I had definitely paid my bills and all those things, but I really had no sense of what I had, what I wanted to have, where I
Right.
was going with it, or any of those things. But I really loved when I found neuroplasticity. I was deep in the weeds with that, and then on
Mhm.
top of it, I was realizing like this financial thing was starting to play out for me. And I had an aha moment when I realized that I was responding in a fight, flight, or freeze relationship
Mm.
with money, that I
Yeah.
had a pre-wired system where money felt scary.
You're
Money
right.
felt, like it might go away really fast.
Mhm.
I had some financial infidelities in my life. And so
Mhm.
I was like feeling really like money felt very icky in many
Yeah.
ways.
And risky. Yeah.
And risky, yeah, but you touch so beautifully in the book about how, like, I mean, I loved how you wrote about the importance of that gradual change and balancing that inherent uncertainty and unclearness. I loved all that you said about even the fight, fight, or freeze stuff, and how when you're going to move into something that's unclear in the future, that um, you mentioned that moving too quickly can actually trigger that old
Mhm.
response
Yes.
system.
Yes.
And I don't know, given your insights, I'd love to know what practical steps or mindset shifts you would give someone to navigate this point in their life when they're starting to face those fears.
Absolutely. Yes, it's a big piece of what we sort of share with people because it helps them make sense of what they're feeling. Again, generally they have felt sure footed, and it's like, what's wrong with me is one of the general feelings. It's like, I must be the only one who feels this way. But the problem is, as you've mentioned earlier, if you only think about your financial well being and you have that sorted out and you're still completely anxious about this change, you start doubting yourself and thinking what's wrong. And the issue is exactly what you've said. You are forcing yourself into too much change too quickly. And there really, as you've said, there are neurological responses to that are designed to keep us alive, right? I mean,
Right.
it's just the way it is. And when you're not aware that that's what's going on, you don't have a way to solve it. But the minute you recognize that's all that's going on, the answer is simply, how do I make the change approachable and gradual? How do I do that? And, that is where planning comes in, just the way you do with money. I mean, you don't save your nest egg in 3 months, right? You've got to be thinking like longer term about it. And you don't need to go out, decades with this stuff. but even a couple of years, even a year, to start getting intentional about what you want. And many of the people we work with, I always say, they're used to reacting. They're fantastic reactors. There's content flying at them and problems to solve and other people's agendas, and we all get very habituated to solving those problems and reacting to those needs. And I mean, my favorite analogy, because I think of it all the time about myself, it's like I'm on a tennis court with this really aggressive tennis ball machine that never stops sending things my way. But that's one of the things my clients are afraid of, is that all goes away. So what you've got to start recognizing is you're going to be the creator of the experience that you're living. And that's just right now for a lot of our clients, a little bit of a weak muscle. It's not that they don't know how to do it. It's that it's not something they've had to do. So we start saying, let's think about how you get your hands in the clay of your life, and let's start somewhere, right? So you've just got to begin with some directions that feel energizing to you. And you've got to think about the next steps you can take, not the whole journey. It's that great analogy about driving at night. You only need to see 6 feet in front of you to keep going. You do not need to know the entire path. So we focus on things like, if you've got 3 or 4 great ideas and they all may feel exciting and also unattainable, that's very common. Stop worrying about full attainment and start worrying about what is the very next obvious thing you can do to get a little closer to a situation where this could actually become a reality. And so we help people really start learning how to create momentum in their own lives toward things they want after they've identified some of those things, and have the confidence to just do the next thing. And it's usually really simple: research or a conversation with somebody. I mean, there's not much else in the world you can do to move your ball forward.
Yeah.
And once you simplify it that way, suddenly, I mean, these are very capable people. Like, anybody who can retire with gas in the tank has done something right. It's not like they aren't good at executing. What they're less good at is the imagination piece, and the asking what they want, and having the sense of control and intention to pursue something that doesn't feel immediately achievable. And we get used to that sense of mastery, and that's our comfort zone. But if you move out of your comfort zone one step at a time, the next thing you know, your brain is actually energized by this. And that's what really stimulates that neuroplasticity. Just don't base jump out of your life, like I did. And you're going to notice, how rapidly you adapt and begin to grow again in these new directions. We see it over and over again.
It fascinates me, really. I mean, I haven't actually ever sat in on one of your sessions, but I do see sometimes it's the real challenge is getting somebody who has that habitual way of being to be able, and I felt it with myself, is that I have a habitual way of, I mean, like I said, I'm really good at checking the boxes,
Yep.
but sitting quietly with myself and thinking about what I intentionally want or believe I can do is a very hard place to live when you're not used to it. One of the things that you said in your book is you talk about being experimental.
Yes.
That's what kept coming up to me for
Yes.
me, is that like that idea really resonated for me, is that like I think I think that I and many people would agree that when you get into a habit, and you also talk about the comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is like you have a comfort zone.
Oh, yeah.
You're good at this.
Yeah.
This. There's a expected outcome. If I do A, B, and C, I'm more than likely going to have D. So, but in this case, you talk a lot about that experimental mindset. Do you have any good examples of something that could expand on that idea?
Yeah. I mean, just broadly, what I'd say about that is it's a really important mindset to bring forward with you. And we always tell people a lot of the mindsets that served you in achieving what you have in the career you've had are not necessarily going to be as helpful in this new chapter where you're the one in the driver's seat and you kind of have to decide what you're doing, where you're going. Because the part of what the experimental mindset is about is realizing that you don't actually have to have the answers, and it's way more fun if you don't, to be honest. I mean, we get paid in work to have answers and to get things right? Nobody, I mean, rarely are we being paid to experiment unless we happen to be literally scientists. I mean, we're paid to get things right. At least my clients are. And so the idea of experimenting, no, 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 no. You don't take risk, and you must analyze things to death, and you exclude all the, things that you can't be sure about, and you pursue this straight path right to the outcome your person wants. And you don't want to do that in this chapter, because you're going to lose out on so many opportunities that you wouldn't be able to invite or allow. And so the experimental mindset is about deciding what you really want is some version of growth and expansion and adventure. And to do that, you've got to try things, and you've got to be okay that the way they go isn't necessarily the way you think they're going to go. And in fact, what you've got to see that as is just data. I think people imagine experiments succeed or fail. And I don't think that's what they do. They just give us data. You have a hypothesis, you test it, you get data. And if you get data that says, don't do it that way, or don't do that again, perfect. Don't do it again. But people will, for example, say to me, and I'll use writing as a great example, because I took this leap to write a book, which, trust me, was not in my comfort zone, nor was all the work that came after getting it written, which is launching it, and all the, oh my Lord, the things I've had to learn and the comfort zones I've had to leave. But people will often say to me, well, I really would love to become an author, but I mean, what if I write something and no one reads it? What if I write something and I can't get a publisher? What if? Well, what if you never try? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you'll regret. Just do it, go for it, and you'll figure it out as you go. You'll learn as you go. Everybody who's achieved everything had to start from a place of just trying. And I remind everybody, the beautiful thing about this moment for the most of them is your survival and livelihood don't depend on this anymore. You don't have to burden your new idea or your new goal with survival. I mean, you've already got that figured out. So what do you have to lose, right? I mean, just go for it and give it a shot. And your odds are pretty good you're going to do well. You've done well at most everything else you've tried. So, it's just getting people to look at life through a slightly different lens. But you're right, it's an old habit. So coaching is part of this, because you need support to rewire your mind and prove to yourself that that's true. But we get more and more confident as we go. I mean, doing this 15 years, I've seen this so many times now that I can tell my clients, even the most skeptical ones, like, look, I've got really, really a lot of data. You trust me on this. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think some people need to know that there's data behind it, It's because that gives them
absolutely.
some credibility. Like, I don't know, something, it's like an affirmation for
Yes.
themselves that they're not alone, and that this
Right.
is something that is, that others have needed, and
Yep.
all of the things. I think, you talk about the identity loss, and I kind of wanted to go back to that, because I
Mhm.
think that accompanies a lot of things. I mean, I can say
Mhm.
I didn't retire, but I definitely had an identity loss when I stopped working for a particular firm that had this enormous reputation, right?
Yep.
Positive reputation. And I think I didn't realize how much I led with that. Like,
Mhm.
I was riding that shirt tail in a big, big way, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And, I guess in your work, how do you help your clients really rediscover themselves and
Mhm.
sort of, I guess, I don't wanna say, well, divorce themselves from that identity that is going to be different now?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is an incremental outcome from a lot, all these exercises we do where people sort of get back in touch with who they are, and they realize actually that they've kind of been wearing this coat of an identity that's not really who they are. It's not that it's necessarily clashing with who they are, but it's not the whole story, and helping people see that there will be new ways to accomplish belonging and mastery and all those lenses that we see ourselves through is a huge piece of this, helping them identify the roles that they will continue to play in life that really actually matter to them deeply, which are often relationship related roles. And helping them discover, new ones that they're able, ways they can pull threads of their professional lives forward that are energizing. I mean, all of that helps. But letting go of these organizational relationships is hard because it feels like a tribe that you're part of, and it's validating, and it's a sense of, belonging, and I was good enough to work there or be there. And I mean, I had that when I moved to Tucson. I worked for a very, very elite firm, law firm. And when I moved to Tucson, nobody had ever heard of it, so it was hilarious when I would refer to it as, oh, I used to be a lawyer at this firm. And people looked at me like, what? I don't know what that is. And it was jarring at first. And then it was a little liberating because I realized it symbolized way more to me than it did to anybody else. And I started realizing, I've got to source my okayness from myself. And you've got to, really start focusing on things like, when I look back over, if I look forward 10 years and I'm standing at the end of that decade, what is the narrative I want to shape about my life? That's way more interesting as an identity. What are people going to say about me at the end of that 10 years if I've lived my life well? They're not going to talk about where I worked. They're not going to talk about, all the money I have, and they're not even going to know that. They're going to talk about how I treated people and how I showed up, and, the generosity I expressed, and the creativity I showed, the willingness to stretch and those things. And so we just try to help people think more about identity from those angles than, these external sort of pieces of validation that I think we get trained to care about. That's what school teaches us and all kinds of things. So we try to think more about those. I don't know how to, describe it as much as to say they're it's almost like what is the narrative you're creating about your life, because that's what's going to matter.
Yeah, it makes me think that one of the things I struggle with in my work as a coach, and I want to dive into that a little bit, but dive into the coaching aspect, is that this is not for the faint of heart. This is work. This is the know thyself kind of work.
Yep.
And that is pretty daunting. And I think, it goes into, I guess, my what I'd like to expand on with you is why having a coach by your side is so important, because it would be very easy to jump off that, in your analogy, the raft, right? And be like, I'm done, or not ever get on the raft to
I'm
begin
out.
with. Right. So I think I'd love to explore, like, your thoughts around why having somebody or a or a network of somebody's around you when you're going through something that's like, so that is really can be very confronting, and but also, as you said, very liberating at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's because I think the coaching or facilitator or even good friend, right, who's not in your head with you, can be so valuable, because assuming this is a person or context you trust, right, where you can be honest, and let's assume that that's the case. And I think that's always important if there's a coaching relationship or any sort of relationship like that. But we certainly have that with our clients. And what we give them is a place to put voice to all of the disorganized, largely negative thoughts that are bouncing around in their head and that seem to have the loudest voice. The doubter voice is always so much louder than the you can do it voice. There are a million sort of choruses going on in our minds about how we're never going to make this work and why even bother, and it's going to be a mortification when it doesn't. And it's all just made up, right? These are just made up things we're busy listening to in our brains. And so the way that we think about it is, well, we need to examine that, but we as people, I would say this about myself, do I do a good job examining that stuff in my brain? No. I tend to listen to it. So you've actually got to have somebody who's willing to ask you, what is standing in the way? What is next? What's the next thing you'd like to do? And why haven't you done it? And what's standing in the way? And I will tell you, the minute you get people to examine that, what they realize is the entire thing is just a thought they keep thinking. There is nothing to it. It's almost always made up. Literally, it's a story they've made up that is not true. And when they examine it and you ask people to actually give you the real reason they can't go forward, they realize, oh, there isn't one. I can go forward. And it's almost just having the ability, to express it, examine it, and then get a little more tactical with somebody who does believe in you. And the next thing you know, you're off and running again. And I believe in momentum, and so usually people don't need that much. I mean, you've got to get over the hump. It's like a speed bump you've got to get over. And I've seen this in my own life. Sometimes I say to people, you really know you're onto something when the challenges appear. That's when because I look at it like this. It's like the universe, or whatever you want to say, God, whatever's out there that's bigger than we are. It's asking you, do you really want this? Because I'm checking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
everything I've ever achieved that was surprisingly successful was I had to meet the most annoying challenges along the way, but it was the proof, right, that I wanted it. And that's what made it sweet when I got it. So I don't know. I think people you just need somebody marching along with you. We all have our dark night of the soul, and it's lonely and it's hard, and you can defeat yourself very easily if you don't have a little bit of positive support. So we see it as critical.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I see it in what I do as well, and I see it, and look, I've used coaches in my life, and
Yeah.
I think that some of my most profound revelations have come with somebody there as a sounding board, or as a guide, or really
Absolutely.
pushing me a little bit to challenge myself, because it
Yes.
is easy to in my case, and I don't speak for everyone, I
Mhm.
can have a victim mentality. And so it's very easy for me to just be like, I can't,
Yeah.
like in the Dan
Everyone's
quote,
against me.
distress, I guess. Yeah. But I want to just go back, because I love that you mentioned the momentum, because it was another one of my favorite quotes. There were so
Mm.
many. I have to say that I couldn't believe how many things I was highlighting. I was like, oh
Oh,
my gosh, I love this. This is so
thank you.
well put. So, but you said, when momentum is threatened by an imposing obstacle, having the courage to take that next small action can be the difference between pushing through and packing it in. And I
Mhm.
thought that's so important in almost every aspect of our life, because there
Yeah.
are definitely those dark moments of the soul, right? Where
Yes.
we need to just remember one step, one
Yes.
action. So
Yes.
I loved that.
Oh, thank you.
So I wanted to also go, because you've talked about the ride on the river. We kind of brushed over it, but I thought that was such a great analogy. So
Mm.
maybe you would be willing to share the story with us, and just
Oh,
like
yeah.
how that has been a theme in terms of looking at retirement and parts of your life.
Absolutely. Sure. I'd love to. Yeah, because it's a real story, that I shared in the book. But it's always struck me hilariously as a great analogy for the way my clients sometimes feel. So I share it with them too on a reasonably frequent basis. But, I was on a vacation in New Mexico with my sort of four teenage kids. They were, I don't know, sort of 14 to 18 zone, and my husband. So the six of us, and we decided we wanted to go whitewater rafting on the Rio Grande. And I'm a pretty adventurous person, you know. I mean, I'm not. I mean, I've been skydiving. You know, I do things that are adventurous, but I'm also not like a crazy daredevil. You know, I am a lawyer, so so
Right.
anyway, my husband's way more adventurous, and of course, so are kids in general, right? So we all troop up to this place, and as I say in my book, as they always do, they hand out these, you know, forms with 8 point
Favors. Yeah.
font, and yeah, you know, and they're full of all the warnings about how you can die, and you know, they're not responsible. I'm thinking, good Lord, I mean, is this a good idea? Should we really do this? But I was watching also my family, and they were so excited, and they weren't even concerned. I mean, I was the one narrating this doomsday scenario in my brain, and I was thinking to myself, you know, well, what are your choices, right? You're either going to go have this adventure, or what are you going to do? You're going to talk everyone else out of it and ruin their day? No. Are you going to go back to the bus and let them have the adventure and miss out on it? No. So stop it, right? You know, like, sure, something bad might happen, but something bad could happen driving back out of here too. So just get on with it. Like, you came for a ride on the river. That's why you came. So forget all the catastrophizing and go and jump in that raft and have the experience you're meant to have. And we did, you know. And what I said in the book was, it was scary at times. I mean, they tell you you might get popped out of this raft. I mean, I was sitting there half the time thinking, oh God, get me through this. But when it was over, the very fact that I was living on the edge of life, that whole ride, is what made it memorable. It's what made it a family experience we'll never forget. And I tell people that's a little bit what it feels like when you're standing on the precipice of a change like retirement. I mean, you're leaving everything you know, you're stepping into the unknown. You feel almost like you don't even have the skills, right, to navigate it or survive it. But if you just shift your thinking a little bit, imagine it as a giant adventure. It's like, how lucky are you? You are here. The moment has arrived. Isn't this what you were working for? What if you really got to lose? You know, usually it's a little bit of a bruised ego, maybe, right? But you've got so much more to gain. And that's what I say to my clients, if you wanted a boring next chapter, you wouldn't be sitting here with me. You would never have come. You're trying to get out of your own way so that you can go have the ride. And I'm telling you, it's an awesome ride. Let's go, right? And if you get on the river and you don't like the direction you're headed, guess what? You can change it. Isn't that wonderful, right?
Yeah.
You're the one running the show. So it's literally a perspective shift. And nothing makes me happier than when someone leaves us after 2 days and they are pumped. They're like, I cannot wait to get going on this. Goodbye, career. It's been great. Goodbye, old friend. We've had a great time together. Thanks for the memories, but I am ready, you know, and nothing makes me happier. And those people go and do incredible things. I mean, I share several stories in my book, but I've got many more, you know, and it's a privilege to have maybe been a little bit of the spark that helped people decide I'm going for it, you know?
And remember the joy of, I think it's that childlike, you know, the the childlike, I don't know, exuberance about
Yes.
life. We don't
Yes.
challenge ourselves
Right. Right.
quite as much. We don't have that voice inside of our head
Right.
telling us that we're, you know, not good enough or whatever it
Yeah.
is, or that, you know, that this is too risky
Right.
when we're younger. And
Right.
that's exciting. You've probably answered this question, but are there any big myths about transitioning from a high status career to
Mm.
moving into a more purpose, I guess, driven retirement?
That's a great question. Yes. Okay. The first one that popped into my mind is this. We hear this all the time. So people are convinced that if they don't say yes to the very first opportunity that is presented to them, and because this happens, right? You know,
Yeah.
you're a high powered person, you changed course, people find out you're retired and they start asking you to get involved in things. And we tell people, you know, oh my gosh, the biggest mistake you can make is say yes to the wrong thing, because now you've tied yourself up again. You've, you know, limited your options and your freedom, and you may be stuck in something you've committed to that you don't even want to be doing. And you're doing it for reasons that had nothing to do with your growth and expansion. You did it because you were afraid, right? So the myth is,
Been there.
oh, but if I don't say yes right away, if I don't, I will never be asked again. That is just not the case. We see the opposite, in fact. And so one of the framing tools we provide to people to avoid that is to say, listen, tell everybody, because you're going to get asked a million times, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? It's the most frustrating question, because if you don't have an answer, what do you say, right? I don't know. So we tell people, just tell people, I'm going to take at least a year sabbatical. And that is a perfect answer, because what it implies is I'm not going away. I'm not disappearing, but I am going to take some time to think about who I am and what I want, which is what sabbaticals are. And thoughtful people do that, right? I mean, you've got whatever, a couple great decades ahead we can count on, assuming we're, in our late 50s or 60s. And so why wouldn't you take that time? Why wouldn't you allow yourself the privilege to take a beat and decide what you want and how you want the cadence of your life to be, how much commitment you want to make, what's ahead of you, and then you can entertain invitations much more thoughtfully. And I tell people, everything's a no unless you can prove it's a yes, because professionals are so habituated to yes. It's like we say yes to everything. So that myth, we always try to break that myth immediately with people, because the pressure to say yes to things can really sideswipe all the possibility that you would otherwise be able to find. So I think that's the big one. I'm sure there are others, but that's the one I would say, if I wanted people to take one thing away from this, it's the myth that you're obsolete, right? If you take a
Yeah.
break. Yeah.
I think that's really important advice. I think that I have found in my life that when I slow down, and I really give myself time to process things,
Yes.
more often than not, it's a no than it is a yes.
Yes.
But it's serving a greater purpose,
Mhm.
because I talked about core values, right?
Mhm.
And if I really value time with my family, let's just say that's one, because that seems to be a
Mhm.
common core value. If I really value that, I can't say yes to everything, right?
Right.
I have to say no to more things than I say yes to, because I
Right.
wouldn't be available to my family if I
Right.
said yes to everything. So, um, such a great reminder, and I love it. One of the things because I know we're short on time, and I want to be respectful of your time, but can
Sure.
you share the Latin phrase that you have taped inside your journal?
Oh, well, my journal isn't sitting right here, so I probably can't actually verbatim. I mean, the Latin itself, I can't, but
But what
it's
it
later
means.
than you think is the interpretation or the translation. It's later than you think, and I love that, because it always reminds me that I cannot sit here and assume, that I've got an endless amount of time to waste, really doubting myself. I mean, it is always later than you think. And, I think anybody who's been around long enough has lost somebody sooner than they thought, or something's happened that's limited an opportunity they thought they were going to have. And you know, thinking you have the luxury of forever is just, it's obviously a fallacy, but it lulls people, I think, into that sense of inertia, really, and not moving on and not getting on with it and making things happen. And that's all I really want to remind myself of all the time, is when I'm standing at an inflection point of, I know I really want to do this, but I feel hesitation. It's the thing that reminds me to not give into the hesitation and just go. I'm not saying if I'm having a real debate about whether it's the right thing to do. I'm just more saying when I know it is and I can feel the resistance because I'm a little afraid. It's like, get on with it. Come on, girl, you got to go. It's later than you think.
Yeah, I love it. I loved it because, well, I read a book a while ago, The 12-Week Year, and it talks a
Mm,
lot about that inertia, that when we
right.
plan for a year, we can really, first quarter can come and go, and we haven't done things, but we kind of have that sense of, well, but I have time to make up for it because I
Yes.
still have 3 quarters of the year. Well, suddenly you're in fourth quarter, and
Yes.
so that the idea of making the chunk of time smaller,
Yes.
and making the momentum more important, to going back to your momentum piece. And the other part is, I always say with investing for retirement, because I
Mm.
work with, younger folks who have not necessarily really achieved their, their golden years of wage
Yes.
earning, and haven't really hit that mark yet. And I always tell them, it is I always have that saying, it's later than you think. It's while it's not too late, it's never
Yes.
too late to
Yes.
start
Yes.
planning, for future spending. Um, it is definitely later than you think, and you need to do it now. Like there's no, like, this hesitation around
Yes.
it is something that you really need to overcome.
Yes. Absolutely.
So before we wrap up, do you have any really, in particular, success story that stands out for some that you can share, that with someone who transformed retirement into something
Mm.
incredibly meaningful?
Oh yes, and in fact, I did share interview this person with permission, their permission in my book, but it's one story that I love to share because of more. It's quite cool what he went and did, but it's really poignant because of how much self doubt he had. So that's the reason I'll choose it.
Yeah.
But this individual, who anybody can read about in the book, he was a real estate lawyer in a large law firm in Chicago, and he was retiring on the early side at 55. And he had all the obvious ideas, but none of them were really lighting him up. So things like, well, I guess I could teach at a law school, or I don't know, I guess I could consult to people on real estate ventures. But you could tell that was all flat. Like, that was not actually lighting him up. And I asked him what somewhere along the way, we ask every client in one form or another, but look, if you could actually do anything and I had the power to guarantee it would be a huge success, like by your definition, what would you choose to do? And I don't care how crazy it is or how outlandish it is. He's like, all right, I'm going to say this out loud, but you are not allowed to hold me to it because it's never going to happen. And I have no clue how to do it. So I'm saying it. And it's embarrassing, but I would be a Broadway producer. And he said, and I mean, the icing on the cake would be if I could win a Tony Award, but obviously none of that's ever going to happen. And I was like, okay, well, people do that, right? So we do know it's possible. It's not like you said you'd live on Mars. So let's unpack it. I mean, what goes into it? To start walking me through it. And of course, he knew way more about it than he even thought he knew. And so we mapped out a little bit of a plan, like, what do you need to know and who can help you? Let's just start there. And so we went about doing a little research and having a few conversations. And he started working this process of the next step. What's the next step? And before you know it, he was kind of off and running, and he put himself in the way of the right kinds of people. And he got an invitation to get involved in a project. And he was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but okay, why not? I mean, the long story short of it is 3 years after he worked with us, he was standing on the stage accepting a Tony Award for Hadestown, where he was one of the producers. He has
I
now produced 8 Broadway shows. 7 years out, he is the happiest guy. I met him for dinner in Chicago about a year ago, and he was just saying, he's like, I cannot believe the life I'm leading. Like, it's incredible. I am the happiest I've ever been. Was always my dream. I'm glad I did the law career because it enabled me the freedom to do this now. But he's like, I'm now living my real life. And, I have this insane community in Chicago and New York, and I'm getting offers to get involved in all these different shows. And he's like, I just pinch myself every day. Like, I can't believe it. And what I love about it is he's truly having a second career, and in a context that he himself didn't believe in. And it just took action, right? He had to start moving in the direction of his dream. And suddenly things started cooperating, and then there was momentum. And now he's living it. And he's just such an inspiring example because, again, he didn't come to us and say, this is what I want and I'm going for it. He didn't. He almost embarrassed in an embarrassed way admitted his dream, which was a total secret to everybody. And then he went about telling me the 90 reasons it could never happen until he finally dropped it all that stuff and just got busy working on it,
Right.
you know? So,
What a tribute to you, really and truly, that you could pull out somebody saying something that they'd be embarrassed about. Because I have to
yeah.
say that I think it's really hard to be honest about, like, things that seem that outlandish,
Yes.
to step to even say some of those, like he said, I don't want you to ever repeat that I said this right now or bring it back at me because it's just
Yeah.
crazy, you
Right.
know?
Right.
There's no
Right.
logic to this at all, but
Right.
it's amazing. It's amazing.
Well, the funny irony is, I know we've hit on a closely held dream when there's a lot of resistance.
Defense, yeah.
Yes, because that's when it means so much to somebody. This is not a flippant remark. This is a closely held dream that honestly usually is a secret from the world, because it's like I can't tolerate it not working out. So it's safer to never try, except it isn't.
Right, right. And that's where coaching comes
Yes.
into play, and accountability, which we
Yes,
didn't get to too much time to talk about, but that's what coaches do.
yes,
They do provide a ton of accountability.
they
Well,
do.
I love all of this. Do you have any final piece of advice you'd like to share with the listeners, especially if they're considering like a significant career shift or or a life transition like retirement?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd love to remind everybody is maybe something I said at the beginning, which is you're not alone. Like, this is hard, and it's okay that it's hard. You know, it really is. It's an all encompassing, dramatic change that is difficult to navigate and filled with possibility and opportunity, but it does take courage, and don't feel like you have to go it alone, and don't think you're the only one. I mean, this is a very common experience, and the problem right now, if you want to call it that, in our society, is that we aren't talking about it enough, and the more we talk about it, the more people start to realize, like, oh, you too, okay. Who knew? So I just would say that, I mean, if somebody listens to this and they're in the middle of something like this and they're thinking I'm the only one who's never figured it out, don't worry.
That's how I always feel. I'm like, everybody else has it figured out. Why can't I get there? That's my negative voice in my head is like,
Right.
that's the
Right.
one that I have on repeat.
Right.
Well, that was beautifully said. And I am really sad to say that this is the end of our time, but I really thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing your insights. And you're just such an inspiration to us, especially as we think about retirement and looking at it differently as an opportunity for growth and purpose. And I want to make sure that our listeners know where to find your book and learn more about your work.
Sure. Well, thank you. And again, thanks for having me. Probably the simplest place to find me is on LinkedIn. You'll see my profile under Elizabeth Zelenka Parsons. And then I've got an author page on two of the three business pages that are linked to my page. So very simple to find any of those areas if you're interested there. And love to see you there. So, but thanks, Traci, for having me. It's always a pleasure to connect with you in whatever way. But this was really energizing and fun. Thanks.
Cool. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you to the listeners for joining us today. If this episode sparked something in you to take action, whether it's journaling about your future goals, setting up a discovery call with me, or grabbing Elizabeth's book to start mapping out your Encore, uh, please by all means reach out to one of the two of us. Until next time, remember, it's later than you think. Start now, and bye for now.